seems that anytime Christians read the book of Philemon, the subject that's always in the back of our minds is slavery in general. Doesn't slavery in any form compromise human dignity? And what is it that early Christians knew that maybe we're missing?
Well, Christopher, you're right. Slavery would not exist were it not for the fall. And the New Testament's tacit acceptance of its existence is an expression of the understanding that we still live in the not yet. And that when the Lord finally returns, every valley will be raised, every mountain brought low. In the meantime, we have to kind of grope our way through a world that is still fallen, and people are going to have to live through hardship. It is important to understand that the institution of slavery, as Paul would have experienced it, and as the early church would have experienced it in the main, was way different from slavery in the antebellum South in the United States, or the slave trafficking and forced prostitution that's going on now around the world. It was a far more benign institution. But the point is, Paul wasn't really thinking primarily in terms of an institution. He was thinking in terms of relationships between brothers and sisters that get transformed by the power of the gospel. And his firm commitment was that where you are in whatever social matrix you're in, does not define who you are. And it's possible, and here's the redemptive thrust for all of us, because all of us are going to experience some measure of what it is to be a slave, some measure of what it is to be without your ability to choose being there on the underside of an over-under relationship. And all of us have the challenge of figuring out how it is that we tell ourselves the story of our having been bought with a price and are not being defined by being in that position. And all of us are going to be, or almost all of us are going to be in, on the plus side or on the top side of over-under relationships. And the way the gospel works itself out in Paul is he recognizes that people are going to be in over and under relationships, and with those places in life come responsibilities. And especially for Paul, who was free, who had all kinds of privilege and advantages like Philemon, the preeminent responsibility is to figure out how to be a steward of the advantages that you have to serve and benefit other people. So that's a starting point in understanding how to approach slavery. There is, at the same time, it's important to recognize that while there is a tacit acceptance of the way things are in Paul's world, there's not an endorsement of slavery as such. In fact, in 1 Timothy 1, where Paul runs through the basic outline of the Ten Commandments and talking about how the law was given so that we would understand what unrighteousness is. One of the terms that he uses in the place of stealing is man-stealing. And man-stealing was a term for slave trading in Paul's world, where people would go and steal people and force them into slavery. And so I think the way Paul would express himself would be, to the extent that slavery can serve as a means of establishing a relationship within a household situation for a person who would be without social protection, without work, without the dignity of having a place at somebody's table. And again, we have to appreciate that in Paul's day, municipal domestic slavery was about being brought into somebody's house. And the householder would be assuming responsibility for their care and for their provision, for giving them work, for taking care of them. And to the extent that this particular social arrangement can be used to enhance people's dignity as opposed to just throw them into the streets without resources, Paul is willing to accept it. But to the extent that it's exploitative, to the extent that people are going out and grabbing people and forcing them into this kind of work, I think Paul would say, no, the church needs to stand up and say, this would be wrong.